Welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us. Now, this week we speak with a woman who's had a huge impact in public service and on the international arena as well. Ambassador Amina Mohammed is the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary of the Government of Kenya. Also this week we get your views on the issues. And as always, we have Africa's Top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Ambassador Amina Mohammed is the Foreign Affairs Secretary in the Government of the Republic of Kenya. In July 2011, she was appointed UNEP Deputy Executive Director and Assistant to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Between 2006 and 2011, she served as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, National Cohesion and Constitutional Affairs. Prior to this, she was Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Kenya to the United Nations and other organizations, including the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Mohammed trained as a lawyer and now has over 26 years of experience in public and foreign service. She shares her insights on Africa, foreign policy, and service. Thank you, Amina, for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues. Now let's start with a look at your career. And you've had an incredibly illustrious career. You've served in the public service. You've been most recently serving at the United Nations. You were a front runner for the World Trade Organization job, the position as head of the WTO. And then you were offered a job as cabinet secretary and you came back into government. What motivated you to accept that position?
Public service. And even when I went into the UN, it was all about public service. But I spent 24 years, in fact, over 24 years in government. And so for me, government was almost a natural habitat, so to speak. But also because of my experience in foreign service, the number of years I'd spent in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when we were recognized as one of the major leaders on the African continent, and the need to try and see whether we could reclaim that spot that we held over so many years. I think I got accustomed to having Kenya leading in many fora. And I was a bit sad that we had lost a little bit of that space. And I thought that with the kind of leadership that we had elected into place, that in fact I was lucky to get this opportunity because anybody else, I think, would have managed to reclaim that space. It really is truly about leadership in Africa.
That's fascinating, your focus on having an impact at domestic level. Well, let's look now at the continent itself, and particularly foreign policy and Africa. Now, the voice of African nations simply can't be heard at international level. We don't have a seat at the table in many instances, whether it's trade negotiations, whether it's geopolitical situations. The question is, what have our governments been doing wrong in terms of foreign policy?
I think Africa had a crisis of leadership. Without leadership, there's absolutely no way that Africa will ever rise up to be what it must be. Economically, I think today we're doing much better than we did before. In fact, it's probably the only place in the world that's growing at over 5% annually, which, given what's happening in the rest of the world, is phenomenal. But we needed the right kind of leadership to take all this, use it, and run with it, and make sure that Africa occupied the place that it must. For a very, very long time, we've been sitting at the back burner, right, taking the back seat. Most of the issues that are being dealt with at the international level affect Africa directly or indirectly. Some of them actually have Africa as the source. And therefore, it's important that, in fact, we deal with these issues. We take ownership of some of the issues that have been plaguing us, leadership being one, the issue of peace and security being another, economic growth being the third one, the issues that have to deal with just our populations and what we want to do with them, provide the necessary infrastructure, right, in terms of even health infrastructure, educational infrastructure, transport infrastructure, logistics, that will drive our economies forward. In Kenya, actually, we've been very, very fortunate because we have a private sector that we must all be extremely proud of. Because it doesn't matter what happened in the country. This sector drove our economy. We need that to happen all over the continent. When that actually happens, then you'll see Africa looked at differently, seen in a totally different light. Africa, an Africa that's full of dignity, that can deal with its issues. And, we will continue to have challenges. But the idea is that we must recognize those challenges, we must deal with them, we must seize the opportunities that are there, but also recognize that this is the only part of the world that has the potential to just grow and grow and grow. We have so many advantages over everybody else, including the demographics. We are the only continent that has such a huge youth population, right? That will allow us not just to be consumers, but producers as well.
So what are the right attributes for a leader in Africa right now?
A leader that can, like I said, see the potential, look at the big picture, and actually realize that as you drive this car, the rear view mirror is so small, you cannot use it as you drive forward, that you actually need to use this windscreen that you have in front of you to go forward. And yes, it's useful to look back from time to time. A leader that knows that, in fact, we are the continent that has not just the demographics, but the commodities as well. Whatever you need to grow is here on this continent, and more in this region. We all have the potential to actually drill oil. All of us. There's nobody in this sub-region of ours that doesn't, right? Tanzania has gas, Kenya has oil, Ethiopia has gas and oil, Rwanda has gas and oil. Everybody has something. Uganda, Burundi, yeah. So we have the potential to actually grow. We have the ingredients that we need to cook this meal, right? With the right kind of leadership, we'll be able to cook it. And 50 years down the road, I think it's time to do that.
Just looking at the scenario across Africa right now, and some nations in the north still trying to stabilize as after what some describe as the Arab awakening. We've also got Mali. We can see the situation there still quite tense. We're going to be watching that. DRC as well. There are various conflicts ongoing. Nevertheless, this is a very resource-rich continent. Now, Western nations get involved when it comes to politics, they get involved when it comes to business. We're getting a lot of international advice coming at us. But how do we as a continent find our own space to create our own destiny and create strong policies that are in the interests of the African people?
One, we need to deal with the instability. We need to deal with insecurity. We need to deal with all these other ailments, including, bad governance and all that, right? We need to deal with that. The first move that we must make is to take ownership. For as long as we're in denial and we're allowing others to do this for us, for as long as we did not take ownership of the difficulties, the challenges that Somalia was facing, right, for 20 years plus, it just, survived, basically. There were no institutions, there were no mechanisms, there was no government, there was no authority, there was nothing, no semblance of nationhood, of statehood. Yeah? We go in, game changer. We pacify parts of it. Others were already there. Uganda was there, Burundi was there, doing their bit as well, right? So Africa actually rose to the occasion, decided we cannot continue to allow this to just continue the way it was, right? So you come in, you take ownership, you put your boots on the ground, and then you start achieving successes, right? We had partners. The partners came in, gave us the support that we needed. Of course, we count on their support going forward, but we also need to be allowed to deal with these issues, right? So that in the end, as we deal with them, we know that we are fully responsible. We don't want to be in a place where there's so many of us around the table. The table is so crowded that you cannot identify who has the main responsibility, who has the secondary responsibility, who doesn't have any responsibility except to support the process, right? And encourage us as we move forward. So it's about ownership, about allowing Africa to take ownership, but also about Africa recognizing that this is its responsibility and taking that leadership role and taking ownership itself. And I think that we have a good opportunity now. Somalia has been a very good test case for us. And I think if we get the support that we need and the recognition that this is an African problem and that must be resolved at that level, right, then it will be a wonderful model for resolving some of the other issues and some of the other crises that we have around the continent.
Well, with respect to the African Union, there are those who say this organization is a dinosaur. It does not reflect the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the people of the African continent. How would you respond to that?
You know, you could say that about any organization in the world. You could say that about the UN. It's not about the organization, it's about the membership of the organization. It doesn't matter how good the secretariat is, you know, because, you know, it's good to differentiate between the secretariat and the membership. The secretariat is basically a facilitator, right, that pushes paper on what the governments decide. Okay, so if there's responsibility, it belongs to the governments. And again, it belongs to governments because of the issues of leadership. So, has the AU been successful? I think in the main, yes, it has been. It was formed as a political organization, and I think it's useful to always remember that. It was formed to deal with decolonization of the continent, in the end to also deal with apartheid, right? And I think it performed very well, because in the years that it was in existence as the OAU, it decolonized most of Africa. When that was achieved, it was time to move to the next level, and that was now deal with the issues of economic growth, of innovation, of technological development, right, of education, of health, and all these other issues that we need to deal with.
What do you think the priorities for the AU should be moving forward?
I think it has its mandate, and I think, you know, that mandate has been modified a lot to take care of the new challenges, the opportunities, the potential of the African continent. So it has its mandate, right. What it doesn't have, and which we must look at ways to providing, is resources. Okay, for any organization to actually deal well and deliver on its mandate, it needs to be resourced well. It hasn't been, because you'll find that even where you know, the contribution is very small, countries are in arrears. So how will this organization survive if it's not resourced to deliver on the mandate that we as members have given it?
So can African nations commit to fully supporting the AU, do you think?
They must. They really must. We were in Addis for the summit. And it was the 50th anniversary of the existence. You know, we share the same birthday actually with the AU, this country. Yeah, and so it was the 50th anniversary. It was a jubilee year, and everybody was extremely happy, and really forward-looking, optimistic. Yeah, everything was aspirational, right? And it was actually, I think that summit was the summit that took stock of where the AU is today, right? Where it delivered and what needs to be done going forward. And so it has set itself, it adopted several decisions and resolutions, but I think that the critical ones were the resolutions we had on economic growth, the ones that we had on supporting each other's peace and security issues and processes, the one that it had on deploying a rapid response force, so that if Mali erupts, you know, Africa can rise to the occasion, provide the troops and the support that are needed to deal with the issue quickly, right, efficiently.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
We've certainly seen what happens when you stand back and debate issues instead of stepping into conflicts to try and address them. And I think the most important example perhaps for the continent was Rwanda in 1994.
Even Mali, actually, even Mali, because the situation in Mali, if we had an African, standby, immediately, as soon as it started, as soon as the government was toppled, then, would have been the time to go in and make sure that we reinstate the government as we even plan, for the future of that country, and maybe allow for new elections to be held and a process to be put in place and mechanisms, frameworks, So, I mean, if we actually had that, then it would have been easy. I mean, what happened in the end was one of our partners, we're very grateful for that actually, walked in and supported, the government and reinstated some semblance of order. But Africa at 50 should do this for itself.
Well, another challenge that African governments face is when it comes to creating policies around particular areas. We've heard of governments that welcome international organizations, businesses even, to come in and help them create policy. How do we ensure that as governments, our interests as African people are being protected when it comes to policies around industries such as mining?
We need to put the right policies in place. And again, it's about ownership, it's about leadership, right? If you have a leader that is far-sighted, they'll put the right people in the right places to handle the right portfolio and with the right mandate. That's what it's about. And when you don't have it, right, you accept that you don't have it and you create and develop the capacity to do that. Uganda did it. It wasn't impossible. And they refused to sign on to any agreements until they had developed their capacity, So that's one way of doing it. But I think that right now, if it's about oil contracts, I mean, you can borrow experts from Nigeria, for heaven's sake. We have that capacity to do that, right? If it's something else, you can go to the south and tell South Africa, listen, I mean, we need a few consultants from your end to look at these things with us and see, and they'll be willing to do that. We need to have a common agenda on the continent and come forward and support each other. Even in this country, we have so much capacity. We have, the human resources that we have. Forget about the other sectors, in the media, right? We have what we need to take us anywhere and to move in any direction, right? We need to deploy it. We need to use it. There's no point in having a resource that you're not using. It's useless to you, right? So we just need to do, okay, I need to use this resource. What do I need? I need the capacity. Okay, I don't have it here. Where do I get it from? And what do I need to do to get it from South Africa, from Nigeria, from, Why do I need to go to across the ocean to look for it if I have it on the continent? It's also an issue of the right mindset, right? The right mindset. And knowing that I have it and I can find it here and I can use it, and that I don't have to go thousands of miles to look for exactly the same capacity that I can find a few miles down the road. Your resources must be sustainably developed, must be sustainably used, right? So we have the resources within the continent. I am so convinced that there is nothing that you will not find on our continent today. And that capacity exists, and we can use it. You can borrow it from each other. We don't have to go too far to do that. In any case, nobody ever came to Africa to ask for capacity, even when we had much better developed capacity in areas that we were much more competent in. So why should we do the reverse?
Regional growth, stability, and strength. Are we moving forward?
We are, definitely. Look at what we've done as IGAD in Somalia. I mean, for me, that's just a wonderful example, right? What we're trying to do with the Great Lakes Conference, which we were actually not supposed to host. It was supposed to be hosted by Angola. And when Angola, came and said, look, we cannot host this. And the rest of, the membership felt that we must host it. It must go ahead. And it cannot be postponed, it cannot be cancelled, because the situation in the DRC deserves Africa's attention. We stepped in, right? And I tell you, I have so much respect for the leadership that we have in this country. Because even without knowing how much it was going to take of our time, of our energy, of our efforts, of our resources, as soon as it became an issue of, the continent needs this, Congo, DRC needs this, because look at it this way, and this somebody told me today, so it's not original to me. A 40-year-old woman today in DRC who was raped at 20 has a 20-year-old daughter who's still being raped today. That's how bad it is, right? And any African leader that cannot step up to the plate and say, I will do it. I'm ready to take up this responsibility and do what I can to ensure that Congo is peaceful, right? And that we start taking even minute steps to address the difficulties, the challenges that they have, right? Doesn't deserve to be a leader on the continent. I can say that without any fear of contradiction.
Amina, you've just touched on what's a very sore subject for many Africans, the conflicts that have been raging across this continent and creating so much devastation, really taking the dignity away from all Africans, not just those in the countries affected, and DRC is certainly one of those. It begs the question, what's wrong with us as a continent? Why can we not resolve our conflicts?
We haven't taken ownership of our problems or issues. We haven't. Others are resolving them for us. We will never be able to resolve them.
Well, in DRC right now, we see vast amounts of resources being exported even as the conflict is raging on.
For those that are living with this day in, day out, it's almost as if for the last 40 years, they have not moved, from the spot they were in. I mean, just imagine a mother like the one I described, and I'm not going to describe that again, going through that, and her daughter going through it, and her son probably going through it, and her granddaughter also going through it, So I think that's how we should look at this and say, listen, we need to resolve this. And seriously, if the wealth never came out of the whatever, that's fine. If it was never exploited, that's also okay. But let's see whether we can reclaim some dignity for Africa, not for DRC. DRC is part of Africa. You know what? It's a finger on your body. It's a toe on your body, right? It is maybe, the shoulder, your shoulder, right? So any indignity, right, that they feel, any humiliation that they feel, anything, any violation that they feel is a violation that's common to the African, right? And so that's how we should look at it. It is our common problem. And so we must all come together and resolve this common problem that we have. And we should, yes, get support from our friends, our partners, but we should not expect them to resolve it for us because it is ours. It is not anybody else's, just like Somalia is our issue. And we must give it the priority it deserves, but also be at the front line of resolving it. If we don't, it's just a matter of time. There will be more countries failing, right? None of us can afford that.
In a few moments, Amina, I'm going to ask you to give your message to the people who are watching the show. What is your message to Africa? But first, before we do that, as a woman who gets asked very often by young women and even gentlemen as well, how do you prioritize and balance your time? Tell us, wife, mother, career woman, how do you prioritize and balance?
I think that things acquire different priorities in your life at different times, right? And I think that there's recognition. I'm lucky, I think, that I have the partner that I have. Because there's also recognition that you don't want your children to inherit the problems that you have today. And that you must put all your energies, right, into trying to make sure that the lives that they inherit, the countries that they inherit, the conditions that they inherit, right, are better than the ones that we lived in. And I think that truly is what I think drives me more than anything else. Just make sure that your children, Julie, as they grow up, right, will have, full dignity that anybody should have, and will not be ashamed of anything that's happening on this continent, not just in the country. I mean, although that's, of course, closer home, but on the continent, that anywhere in the world they can hold up their heads high, right, and join any conversation without feeling that, oh my goodness, I just sat down and this conversation is about Africa, like all other conversations have been, right? That's one of the reasons why I actually wanted to do the World Trade Organization, because I knew that it was one of the ways in which we could ensure that Africa moved forward, It would do that much more effectively. I say that also without any fear of contradiction if there was an African at the helm of the organization, right? Because then Africa becomes a priority, and you make sure that the capacity is developed on the continent to negotiate agreements that are truly fair to the continent, right? And that will help us grow. And they will also create the level playing field that we need to join the rest of the world, right? And you know, in a way, I'm kind of happy that it didn't happen, because I have an opportunity now to do almost the same thing, but at a different level, right? And about that, I'm quite pleased. But it's just about, you know, making sure that, you know, everybody has to make a contribution, all of us. And I think that really is the message. Each one of us is a citizen of this continent, right? And the sooner we realize that, and we move away from defining ourselves, right, as, you know, clans or tribes or sub-tribes or things like that, the better for the continent.
Powerful. Finally, please, Amina, look into the camera and do share your message with many Africans watching today from the heart. What are your words of wisdom?
I'll just repeat what we all know, that Africa is our home, and none of us has any other homes, and that it is our responsibility to actually make sure that this home that we have is stable, is secure, and allows us to live in dignity. And each and every one of us has a contribution to make. Please don't wait for others to do it for us. Let's do it ourselves, and let's do it together.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Informed, focused, passionate, and determined, Ambassador Amina Mohammed is part of a new breed of African leaders who can certainly lead the continent on a path towards progressive growth, development, and ultimately success for all the people of this continent. Time to get your views on the issues now. Let's take a look.
This week we asked you, in your own view, what policies or factors should be put in place to facilitate healthy intra- and inter-African business? Ategeka Ronald says, from Uganda's experience, promote regional cooperation, reduce bureaucracy to investment, upgrade the education system to suit the current market demands, infrastructure development, for example, the railway, and above all, tap and check on corruption. The future of the world belongs to Africa. Wakulima says, government should take the lead in structuring and propagating value chains, first at a regional, then continental level. Simon Wagura says, improve on state security and give loans at an affordable rate to young investors.
To take part in our weekly hangouts, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues. On Twitter, @AfricaLD.
Thank you for sharing your views. Keep them coming in. Let's keep the discussion going. What are your thoughts on Africa and foreign policy? What can we do to build stronger nations, regions, and ultimately a stronger Africa? Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature African countries in terms of ease of business according to the World Bank 2013 report. We also highlight some of the recent reforms they have undertaken that make them favorites of African entrepreneurs and CEOs. Ranking criteria includes everything from construction permits to taxation and accessibility of credit. At number 10 is Kenya, ranked globally 121st. They enhanced electronic filing system which eased the process of paying taxes, made contract enforcement easier by introducing a new case management system for the resolution of commercial disputes, and reduced the amount of red tape involved in registering a new business. Uganda stands at number 9 with a global ranking of 120. They clarified mortgage rules which reduced the risks involved in lending and borrowing to homeowners, established a private credit bureau and streamlined court system, reducing the amount of time taken in dispute resolution. At number 8 is Zambia, which ranks 94 on the global scale. They eliminated the minimum capital requirement for starting a business, consolidated the border post with Zimbabwe to ease the flow of goods, allowing custom declarations to be submitted online, and they brought the court system into the cyber age, allowing electronic reference of cases, laws and records. Namibia comes in at number 7, ranking 87 globally. They reduced the time and expense requirement to connect to the electrical grid, adopted new legislation that clarifies the procedures for liquidation, and computerized the system for registering a new business, slashing registration times. Number 6 is Seychelles, which stands 74th globally. They eliminated social security tax and reduced labor and corporate income taxes. Coming in at number 5 is Ghana, ranking 64th on the global scale. They granted an operating license to a private credit bureau and drastically reduced the amount of time it takes to launch a new business. At number 4 is Botswana, standing 59th globally. They upgraded the country's busiest border post with South Africa, slashing the length of time for import and export of goods. And technology upgrades in the Botswana court system have sped up the resolution of commercial disputes. Coming in at number 3 is Rwanda, which stands 52nd globally. Rwanda is one of the easiest places in the world to start a business, ranked 8th globally in this category, and they have shortened the length of time required for connection to the electricity grid from 55 days in 2011 to 30 days today. South Africa stands at number 2, ranking 39th globally. It is the best place in the world to obtain credit. They instituted a customs modernization program that reduced export times, and they have simplified the tax code to reduce tax prep times. At number 1 is Mauritius, ranked 19th globally. They have eased property transfers by implementing an electronic record-keeping system and by statutorily limiting the length of time it takes to receive a land title, and recruited more judges and added more courtrooms to reduce judicial backlogs, shortening the average court case by more than 100 days. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
We've already come to the close of the show, and this week we combine 2 quotes from the late Ghanaian statesman Kwame Nkrumah, who was known as a passionate Pan-Africanist. This is what he said: "I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. We face neither east nor west. We face forward." And with those inspirational words of Kwame Nkrumah, we end the show. Thank you for joining us. Have a brilliant week. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.